Okay, folks, we're going to get started in just a second here as we got a jam-packed agenda. So bear with us. We'll start just very quickly here.
Hello, everyone. Here we are again on Zoom. Welcome to the Massachusetts Forest Alliance annual meeting. I know we all miss each other in person, but speaking for myself, I don't miss the driving. I'm Dickon Crane, a forest landowner, a logger, a farmer, and from a kid, a lover of trees. I'm zooming in from Yosemite, where I'm both awed and devastated by what forests can be and how pests and fire can take them down. MFA has been focused on climate change for most of the time we've been in existence. Over the past several years, it's become clear to the board that climate change is the most important challenge we face. And as Eric Kingsley in the keynote will tell you, we are the people to face it. How you might ask, are we going to do that? Marx is going to explain how local and regional carbon programs can benefit family forest owners. Kathryn Morse from MCX is going to talk about how forest landowners can get carbon credits with no upfront costs. These are important incentives. Keeping private forest land in forest means keeping the most at-risk forests in Massachusetts from conversion to other uses that will likely release carbon to the atmosphere rather than sequester and store it. We also will present the Douglas B. Cook Wood Producer of the Year Award, the Howard F. Mason Forester of the Year Award, the Friends of Forestry Award, and the John H. Lambert Jr. Forest Stewardship Award. I think it's safe to say that most of us bust our butts because we believe in what we're doing, not because we're looking for public acknowledgement. I think we also know that sometimes our peers need and deserve a pat on the back. MFA represents not just foresters, loggers, forest products producers, and families that own forest land. MFA represents everyone that acknowledges that Massachusetts has recovered from deforestation before we knew what it meant. And now that we know what it means, we have a job to do. And I know, and by know, I mean that we are learning. I'm going to let Chris Egan take it from here. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, come on in.
Thank you, Dickon. Let me just okay, folks, welcome. Sorry, just a few technical difficulties here. We might have a few of those as we go through the meeting, so bear with us. Just a few logistics about the meeting. We're recording this. We'll be putting this up on our YouTube channel next week. We're doing this in a Zoom webinar format. That's a little different from Zoom meetings, so we can't see you. Only the panelists will be visible as they present. If you have questions, please submit them into the Q&A box. We have a lot of attendees. We have about 130 people registered for this meeting, so we're hopeful that our presenters will be able to get through the questions. If not, the presenter emails are in the program book. You should have received an email about an hour ago, which had links to the program book and some other materials for the meeting. So you can go back and open that up. You can minimize this window, open that up, and take a look at the program book if you haven't already done so. And then in terms of credits, for those of you who were wondering about Connecticut credits, we got confirmation that the meeting's been approved for 1 Connecticut CEU. You told us when you registered if you needed credits. We'll take the list of people who actually attended this Zoom meeting from the Zoom report that we'll get. And then I will email out credit certificates to you next week. So that's the way that will work. We're fortunate to have our meeting sponsored by Farm Credit East. Farm Credit East has been a sponsor of our annual meeting, I think, since the beginning. They've been very generous sponsors to us, and they've got a lot of terrific services that would be very welcome for our members. So to talk a little bit more about Farm Credit East and what they have to offer is Chris Lawton.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris Egan. I have to specify which Chris I'm talking to because we have several on the line. Let me just quickly share my screen. I'll give a brief presentation. So just confirm that you can see this.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So Farm Credit East is pleased to be sponsoring today's meeting. A lot of people don't even realize that we serve the forestry community. They think of us as a farm lender, and that's primarily what we are, but we do have close to $800 million in forestry loans in our territory in the Northeast. We are part of the National Farm Credit System that serves across the entire country and is made up of about 65 independent associations, of which we are one. We are a farmer-owned cooperative, or a borrower-owned cooperative, I perhaps should say. We include farming, fishing, and forest products. We serve about 15,000 customers across 7 states. The big news for us this year is that we've announced our intention to merge with Yankee Farm Credit, which will make it 8 states. That's pending regulatory approval and a shareholder vote. But if those line up, we will be January 1st, 2022, we will become one, and we will serve the entire Northeast area of New England, New York, and New Jersey. Right now, this white area is cut out. That's Yankee Farm Credit. But as I said, they've announced their intention to merge with us in the coming year. We have 20 branch offices throughout the region serving our community, and we have a full suite of financial services as well. Lending is of course our core business, but we have a lot of other services such as payroll, record keeping, consulting, tax planning and preparation. We do more than 10,000 tax returns every year for our borrowers, or actually you don't even have to be a borrower. We have some customers that just do taxes only with us. So number of services. One of the big benefits of borrowing from us is our patronage dividend program. Being borrower owned, our profits go back to our customers. And we've, since 1997, we've returned close to $1 billion in dividends to our customers. And in just closing up, I want to mention our Farm Start program. Serving young and beginning producers is a core part of our business mission. And so about 15 years ago, we came up with our Farm Start program. It invests up to $75,000 in capital to beginning farming, fishing, and forestry enterprises. Since inception, we've done over 340 investments and invested over $16 million. It's geared towards startups that are not traditionally bankable, so they may not have adequate collateral or down payment to get a traditional loan. So Farm Start is geared to help those burgeoning entrepreneurs get their businesses started and off the ground. They have up to 5 years to repay it or roll it into conventional financing, with the intention being that after 5 years in, they would be more traditionally creditworthy. So our Farm Start program is an important initiative that we have come up with. That's it. I will return the screen to Chris Egan and let you get on with your meeting. And again, we're very pleased to be sponsoring today's meeting, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate your support. And urge people to investigate further if you're not already doing business with Farm Credit East, to take a look at what they have to offer. And there's some interesting and exciting things that you just shared with us there.
Yeah, any questions, feel free to follow up with your local branch office or with me personally. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to move on. And what's up next is the Howard F. Mason Forester of the Year Award. And to present that award, MFA board member Charlie Thompson.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This award is named for Howard Mason, who was one of the first post-World War II foresters in New England to advocate for the concept of forest management and not just tree cutting. He was a dirt forester who I think mentored both his bosses and a number of younger foresters as they came along. Rex Baker, this year's award winner, I suspect that even a lot of people who know Rex may not realize what an interesting life he's had. He's been involved in forestry on 3 continents over a 60+ year career. And we're lucky that most of the time has been spent here, where he's provided consulting services to clients, run programs to encourage forest management, and taken what I think is a hands-on, down-to-earth approach to forestry with an emphasis on being in the woods and attending to the details of doing things. He's a very modest person, and I think he deserves the recognition that goes with this award. And so I will turn it over to Rex and hope that the technology works.
Sorry, Rex, I mistakenly muted you.
Am I okay now?
There you go. Yep, thanks.
Well, I humbly accept this award. And as usual, I guess you want a few comments. And I want to give some thanks to different situations. It all started with the U.S. Forest Service, summer employment through college, 3 summers, 2 summers in the Sierra Nevada in California, 1 summer in Eastern Oregon. And that followed by the Forest Service full-time employment on the Sayus Law in Western Oregon. And that got interrupted by military recall. And that got interrupted by trying to earn a living. And we're in a retail flower shop business for a number of years. And we finally sold that. And I said, now what am I going to do? And I said, well, let's go back to the University of Massachusetts and learn about the consulting situation in Massachusetts. And with Professor Mawson showing me how to use the prism, which I had never had before, I started consulting in about 1980. And then came along a U.S. Forest Service sponsored Yankee Forest project that was designed to help landowners get into forestry with free management plans. And doing that with Mark Tremblay down in Rhode Island, and the 2 of us formed the RIFCO, Rhode Island Forest Conservators Organization. And Mark is still continuing with that. And then I continued consulting around Worcester County with the help of Rick Johnson and various references from him. And I wanted to thank my wife of 54 years for continuing support. And I pretty much finished out all the consulting around Worcester County last year during the pandemic. And that pretty much sums up my forestry career. Right now, I'm what I could say completely retired, although I still have my 440 skidder and my mobile dimension sawmill, which I'm playing with on our 40-acre tree farm almost every day now. So that's a thank you to the forest industry and the University of Massachusetts forestry program. And thank you very much. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Rex. Really a well-deserved honor. And as Charlie said, a very interesting life Rex has had, and certainly contributed a tremendous amount to this industry and to those engaged in forest management. So thank you again, Rex. Okay, up next is our keynote presentation from Eric Kingsley. Eric is a partner at INRS, Innovative Natural Resource Solutions. An MFA has worked with INRS in various parts of its history. They helped us with our federal grant to promote modern wood heat in Massachusetts. They also helped us develop a strategic plan. They're a great organization with a lot to offer. Eric's in a place without great reception, so he's pre-recorded his presentation. So I'm going to attempt to share that with you. And hopefully I can make this work. So you'll have to forgive me because I'm going to have to show you another screen here, and then we'll launch this and we'll be good to go. Let me just make sure that my sharing is on. Yeah. Here we go.
Good morning. This is Eric Kingsley with Innovative Natural Resource Solutions, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about some of the emerging opportunities for forest landowners to engage in carbon marketplace. This is a very new and emerging and dynamic market. I'm going to talk a little bit about where things are today and where they might be going. Real quickly, Innovative Natural Resource Solutions was founded in 1994. We work at the intersection of forest industry, energy, and economic opportunity. I work in Maine. I'm based in Maine. We have offices in New Hampshire. Really, we work across the Northeast and across the country on these issues. We work for all sectors, private sector, nonprofit, government, conducted work in all regions of North America. Real quickly, climate change is the greatest challenge to ever face humanity. And forest products industry is very well positioned to be a part of the solution to this enormous challenge. Forests are basically carbon capture. Dilbert, I invented a cost-effective program to harvest CO2 from the air and turn it into a construction material. So you invented a tree. Yeah, that's what trees do. That's what forests do. And this is an ecosystem service that private landowners in Massachusetts, across New England, and across the world have been providing for a while. And they're just starting to be recognized for that enormous service. Real quickly, taking a look at forest carbon on private timberland in Massachusetts, it's growing. And if we take a look at the same data while collapsing the axis, we'll see it grows meaningfully. It grows about 0.7% per year. So the forests, the private forests of Massachusetts, the timberland that folks in this organization own and manage, have been adding carbon stocks for decades, probably forever, and have been providing that service. So there's a developing market for carbon offsets. And what is...
Okay, so we're having a problem here. Okay, I need to actually share the the right screen, which I'm not doing. Let's do this.
A carbon offset.
Let me start this from the beginning.
Sorry to
morning.
folks that have to hear
This
me
is Eric
twice.
Kingsley with Innovative Natural Resource Solutions, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about some of the emerging opportunities for forest landowners to engage in carbon marketplace. This is a very new and emerging and dynamic market. I'm going to talk a little bit about where things are today and where they might be going. Real quickly, Innovative Natural Resource Solutions was founded in 1994. We work at the intersection of forest industry, energy, and economic opportunity. I work in Maine. I'm based in Maine. We have offices in New Hampshire. Really, we work across the Northeast and across the country on these issues. We work for all sectors, private sector, nonprofit, government, conducted work in all regions of North America. Real quickly, climate change is the greatest challenge to ever face humanity. And forest products industry is very well positioned to be a part of the solution to this enormous challenge. Forests are basically carbon capture. Dilbert, I invented a cost-effective program to harvest CO2 from the air and turn it into a construction material. So you invented a tree. Yeah, that's what trees do. That's what forests do. And this is an ecosystem service that private landowners in Massachusetts, across New England, and across the world have been providing for a while. And they're just starting to be recognized for that enormous service. Real quickly, taking a look at forest carbon on private timberland in Massachusetts, it's growing. And if we take a look at the same data while collapsing the axis, we'll see it grows meaningfully. It grows about 0.7% per year. So the forests, the private forests of Massachusetts, the timberland that folks in this organization own and manage, have been adding carbon stocks for decades, probably forever, and have been providing that service. So there's a developing market for carbon offsets. And what is a carbon offset? Real simply, trees sequester, store carbon. About half of the dry weight of a tree is carbon. What that means is that if you're looking at 4 green tons on the landing, you're looking at a ton of carbon. You're looking at 2 tons of water and a ton of other stuff. But in that 4 tons on the landing or on the stump, you're looking at 1 ton of carbon. Companies and some others pay forest landowners to capture that carbon and make claims regarding offset emissions. So a factory somewhere sends money to a forest landowner in order to capture carbon, and that forest landowner sends that factory or whoever else their offsets, and the factory is able to make a claim either for regulatory or marketing or other purposes about the carbon neutrality of their operations. There's a few forest carbon types, forest project types. One is afforestation. This is creating a forest where none exists. Most of these projects are not in the US, but a spot where you might think about it would be strip mine reclamation in parts of Appalachia or parts of the Powder River Basin. There might be afforestation projects. There's avoided conversion, where a forest that is a forest is kept from becoming something else. But the vast majority, overwhelming majority of forest carbon projects in the United States and across North America are improved forest management. And I'll be speaking about what that is. These are really managed forests that are providing the ecosystem service of carbon capture, storage, all three of those. So forest carbon markets is basically two markets, probably many more. There are two big markets. One is the compliance market. And just like it says, companies use these to comply with a legally mandated emission target. This is most notably the California market, but also the EU and some other jurisdictions have targets. Well, they're not really targets. Have regulation that require emitters to offset their emissions. Forest carbon projects are one way to do it. These projects tend to have relatively consistent pricing. They've got some demand built in at least through this decade, subject to regulatory change. And in a compliance market, you're signing up your timberland for a century. You'll be making a commitment that lasts 100 years, which, 100 years is a long time, and probably none of us will live to see the end of that. So you're certainly making a multi-generational commitment. Voluntary market is where companies or sometimes individuals voluntarily choose to purchase offsets to reduce their net emissions. There's some significant variation in price here. There's some value with charismatic projects that are in certain locations where corporations are headquartered or that have a good story. The demand here is uncertain, but it has absolutely been growing. We've seen a number of large companies, particularly tech companies, but not exclusively, enter this market and make some serious plays. These commitments in the voluntary market are for 40 years. Still a long time, but less than half of 100 years. So compliance market, how's it work? Landowner really gets a big upfront payment. So they receive a large credit issuance after the project's first year, equal to the differential between the property stocking and the average stocking for the same forest type in the same ecoregion. So if you have a forest that is very well stocked relative to your neighbors, this could be appealing because you get those credits up front. You don't have to sell them all up front. You don't have to sell any of them up front if you don't want to, but you can sell those right away, have a significant cash payout, or you can spread those sales over time. After year one, the landowner then receives credits equal to growth net of harvest. So what that means is if you're growing more than you're harvesting, you'll continue to receive credits and can sell those credits. If you harvest 100% of growth, there are no new credits issued, and this lasts for a century. Voluntary market is a little different. It doesn't really rely upon that same what do your neighbor's forest looks like. Under a voluntary market protocol, the landowner receives credits equal to the difference between the stocking that exists right now and the stocking that would exist under short-term profit maximization. What's that? That is, if someone went in to liquidate the property of all merchantable volume with whatever restrictions exist in state law or an easement or any other restrictions on that property, what's the difference? So in this, not all the credits are issued in year one because most properties you couldn't liquidate in a year. However, over the first several years, you receive the bulk of the credits. Not in that way, not unlike the compliance market. After that, landowner receives credits just like under the compliance market, equal to the growth net of harvest. So again, if you're growing more than you're harvesting, great. You're going to get some credit for that. If you are harvesting up to the level of growth, there will be no new credit issuance for that year. And actually, we say that year. The inventories are done on 5 and 10 year cycles, so it's not measured annually. All right. So what makes a good carbon project? This is really specific to voluntary and compliance markets, the two that I've talked about. You need a lot of land. Right now, in Massachusetts, in New York, in much of New England, you need somewhere in the area of 5,000 acres in order to make it work financially. You really need to plan to practice harvesting less than growth. This is going to provide you with some of those ongoing payments, ongoing credit issuances over the 40 or 100-year period. And I recommend folks not enter into a carbon deal if they expect to sell the land. We've certainly seen some sell with a carbon encumbrance, and that's an emerging market, but it'll absolutely impact the sale price of that timberland. So if you're thinking you're going to sell, this is not this may not be something to consider. That said, we've seen carbon projects used as an odd form of estate planning, which gets a bunch of value off of the land and encumbers it for, in the case we saw, encumbers it for 40 years. It was transferred to some relatively young miners who presumably 40 years from the time they receive that land, when they have unencumbered land, will be older, wiser, and able to make a good decision about what to do with that. Spots with fantastic, robust timber markets tend to not be great spots for a carbon project, just because carbon can't compete with what timber prices can be. However, if the market is at all suppressed, or there are mill closures, or significant distance to market, these can all be fantastic opportunities. And I mentioned this before, but carbon projects are very compatible with easements. So if there's property with easement on it, this certainly it's worth looking at. All right. So I talked about those two markets. There are others, and there's more coming. You'll be hearing, after I speak, you'll be hearing from someone talk about the Family Forest Carbon Program. This is a partnership between the American Forest Foundation, Tree Farm, and the Nature Conservancy. This is a practice-based program where landowners are compensated or supported in conducting certain carbon-friendly timber harvesting practices or forest management practices. These are available for much smaller acreage and will soon be available in the Northeast, and certainly something to look at and consider. You'll also be hearing from someone with NCX. You may have heard of them previously as Sylvia Terra. This is a very intriguing program as opposed to a 100-year or 40-year commitment. They are effectively providing landowners a payment for 1 year of deferred harvest. So, and you'll be hearing some details there. There are many states, about 20 at my last count, that are pursuing some sort of market of their own. I'm not sure where these are going. The ones that are most effective are probably market bundling, where state helps put together a group of folks, provide some security and some backstop so that smaller landowners can work in aggregate to reach some of the acreage thresholds that I mentioned earlier. There's certainly some promise there. There are federal efforts underway led by USDA. These have a focus on smaller forest and farm landowners. Don't really know where these will be going, but something to watch. I would say importantly, this is a very rapidly and wildly evolving space. I expect that we'll see dozens, if not more, different programs over the next years. There are certainly going to be opportunities for forest landowners. This is something to watch and weigh against what your other opportunities are as a landowner. Excuse me. If this is of significant interest to you, I would urge you to request being put on this newsletter list. My colleague Charlie Levesque, email Levesque at INRS LLC, will soon be heading up the Securing Northeast Forest Carbon Program. And this will be all of the New England states plus New York. And the goal here is to really provide state foresters and private sector foresters and landowners with the latest information about the opportunities for forest carbon markets and carbon-friendly forest practices. So what I've been talking about are forest carbon markets. So selling carbon. There are also things that you as a landowner can do. They tend to be things like longer rotations and growing more saw logs. But there are things that you can do absent any external compensation that still has your forest working harder to sequester and store more carbon. And the focus of this program will be on family forest owners. So if that's of interest to you, I would urge you to email Charlie Levesque. If this goes by and you forget how to spell his name, you can email me and I'll make sure he gets it. All right, so it's not just forests. I mentioned USDA is looking at farmland and farm practices, but there's far more. European markets are now starting to reward mass timber, so cross-laminated timber and other wood-intensive building materials, and biochar. Projects in the US are potentially eligible for these. I'm involved in some, and I'm involved in one where the biggest revenue source is not the finished product, but it is in fact the carbon. So if that sort of helps put things in perspective about how important these might be to some projects. Down the road, there's a possibility that carbon-friendly forest products, long-lived products, notably lumber and panel products, will receive similar treatment, maybe in the EU, maybe elsewhere, maybe here someday. This could even go so far as to include long-lived paper, but certainly the lumber and panel products are first in line. And how all this plays out, unknown. Could be a carrot, which would be incentives, like we've been talking about in payment for things, or it could be a stick, for example, a tax on competing products. But I would expect carbon to be a factor and an increasingly common factor in purchasing decisions going forward. First time I heard someone talk about this was 2003, 2004. It was a beer company with global operations, and I don't know that I scoffed at it, but I didn't take it as seriously as I may have. It's now very clear that that particular company makes many of their decisions based on carbon impact. All right, so what's this mean for the forest industry? New revenue opportunities for forest landowners, and that's fantastic. going to probably constrain the supply of some products. So if you're harvesting less in order to grow more timber and grow more carbon, loggers are going to be impacted by that change in harvesting. And if we end up deferring harvest and growing more big saw logs, what's that mean for wood flow? Both in the near term, when we probably have to move a bunch of low grade, and in the long term. What's it mean for investment in manufacturing? And right now we're looking at carbon prices in the $8, $10, $12 a ton range for forest carbon. What if that price changes? How does that change behavior? Forest Proud, which is a forest industry communication coalition, recently shared an article predicting a 10x increase in the price of carbon over the next several years. I suspect that is not going to come to pass, but some price increase will. But it's very interesting to watch. So my firm helps folks evaluate these opportunities. Happy to talk to you if this is of interest. We help landowners consider whether this is right for their situation. We've also helped some industries evaluate what the impacts on them might be, both opportunities and challenges. I recently told a paper mill here in Maine that I didn't think their big competition going forward was other paper mills or really other wood users. I think their big competition going forward is likely carbon, and they need to think about that as part of their strategy. INRS has a relationship. It's a non-exclusive relationship with a carbon developer, Blue Source. We've worked with a number of programs and other developers, but we do have a relationship there. If you've got a project, we can have someone looking at it quickly. And I would say for many landowners, this is not a good fit right now, but the markets are constantly changing, constantly under development, and will be evolving for a while. So it's a space to watch. I'm going to quote Leopold, my favorite environmental thinker. Conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest. I firmly believe that. I believe many in our industry share my thoughts there and share Leopold's thoughts. Carbon credits, managing forests for carbon is a way to reward landowners. Doesn't mean it's right for every landowner, but it is a recognition of the important ecosystem services that landowners provide. If you have any questions, I'd encourage you to email me, Kingsley@INRS-LLC. I'm always happy to respond, share my thoughts, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Okay, so folks, if you have questions for Eric, he is with us to answer those questions. Please type them into the Q&A box. Eric, just a couple of questions that I had. For these larger markets, the California, the compliance market and voluntary markets, you need a lot of land, and is that because there's upfront costs to trying to measure or justify the carbon there?
Yeah, and Chris, I'm assuming you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you're absolutely correct. At this point, the inventory costs and sort of the establishment costs of a project are so high that you really need a certain amount of carbon. It's not necessarily that you need acreage, but acreage and carbon are highly correlated. If someone on this call owns land in Alabama, you might only need half as much. But if you own land in central Quebec, you need twice as much. So it's really about the amount of carbon, both on the land and growing. That's starting to be addressed. think in the future there's going to be some remote sensing opportunities, and for example, NCX is already using some very intriguing remote sensing opportunities. So hopefully those costs will come down. There's also some opportunity probably going forward for landowners to, essentially bundling landowners together to reach the threshold. We're not quite there yet, but as I said, this is a evolving and constantly changing space. So I understand most folks on this call probably can't access these markets at this point, but that, at least the couple that I talked about, but that's changing and will change more.
Yeah, and those larger landowners, there's a question about how many of those larger landowners are there. There are some private landowners that own that much acreage. There are also some large nonprofits and land trusts and that may own that much acreage as well.
Absolutely. And for folks interested in this, particularly the smaller acreages, I'd encourage them to get on the newsletter I mentioned that my colleague Charlie Levesque at INRS LLC will be doing, because that's a great way to keep in touch with what's changing, and things are changing.
Yeah, there's a question about the voluntary market and the economics, and some people are doing this bundling themselves. Some nonprofits are trying to do that. We're going to hear more about the one-year contract at NCX a little bit later. So folks who are asking about that, we're going to have a speaker from NCX shortly. A question about what the financial impact is if you enter one of these markets and you're selling your carbon, and then you lose your forest carbon stock due to like a fire or a weather event or something. What happens then?
Sure. When you enter, a certain percentage of your credits go into what amounts to an insurance pool that all other carbon projects have put money into the insurance pool. So if your carbon stocks decline for what the term of art is, now I'm going to not be able to remember it, unintentional reversal. So that's fire, hurricane, insect, disease. You're covered. You won't be getting more credits, but you're not going to have to replenish the credits that you lost. However, if you enter into one of these deals and then let's say you go ahead and liquidate because the carbon police are not going to be there day-to-day checking on you, that's an intentional reversal and you're liable for what occurred. I can tell you, just to give you a sense of these projects, we're familiar with a 10-ish thousand acre project in northern New England, a few hours north of Massachusetts, 10,000 acre project. Landowner's going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million upfront, and then some ongoing revenue, and will continue to harvest as they've been doing so for the last 40 years. For the last while. They plan to continue that for the next 40 years. So, that's the sort of project that's attractive.
Great. I don't know if anyone else has any further questions for Eric before we. Yeah, I think we've answered all the questions that have come in.
Okay, great. Well, Chris, let me thank you for your flexibility in letting me sort of join remotely today, and apologize for everyone for having to hear part of what I said twice.
Yeah, well, some of us, I think the panelists may have heard that. So yeah, I was a little bit trying to figure out the complexities of this. So I apologize to everyone for the delay in the presentation here.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Thanks very much, Eric. Great. Well, thanks to Eric for his presentation. Up next, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Laura Marx from the Nature Conservancy. Laura's a forest ecologist. She's done quite a bit of work in this space with a whole series of programs. So we've heard about the sort of the larger national programs from Eric. And these, as Eric said, you need to be a larger landowner right now to take advantage of some of those. So there are other programs out there that would be appealing to smaller landowners, a lot of whom we have on this call and in this meeting. So we're delighted to have Laura with us and explain a little bit more about some of these local and regional programs. So please welcome Laura Marx.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen. Just let me know if you can see that, Chris.
Yeah, we can see it. You might need to, yep, it's good to go.
Great. So thanks for that introduction. And thank you, Chris, for inviting me to speak. I was thinking back, the last time I saw many of you in this virtual room in 3D was the Wood Producers Council meeting in March 2020, like days before we weren't allowed to all gather inside in a restaurant anymore. So I was thinking back on that as I put together this presentation. And I do know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm the forest ecologist for the Nature Conservancy's Massachusetts chapter. As Chris said, this is great because Eric covered all the basics. So I really just wanted to talk about a couple things that are sort of need to knows about forest carbon money in Massachusetts. Not comprehensive, not starting from scratch, but Eric, you did such a great job of covering the carbon markets that exist and sort of the philosophy and history behind that. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that carbon offset funding, I think you guys know this, but carbon offset funding is not going to save us all. We're not all going to be millionaires. As Eric said, in this region, the money is relatively small. We don't have as high a growth rate as the tropics or the South, and we also have a very high baseline here. However, the idea that you need 3,000 to 5,000 acres to enter the carbon markets is not, again, as Eric mentioned, that's no longer true. And so the fact that various people have figured out how to make carbon offset market funding accessible to people who have 75 acres, 100, 150, means that there's a new real pool of money to do things that make sense for many reasons. And I want to just from the very beginning point out that I think I always get a little nervous whenever someone tells me they're doing something just for forest carbon, or they tell me they only care about forest carbon. I think that ignores a lot of values that the forest brings us, and it leads you to weird places like, let's just cut everything down and plant short rotation plantations. My colleague Mark Anderson is fond of saying that only caring about forests because you care about carbon is like only caring about people because they contain a lot of calcium. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The second thing that I wanted to share is that there are many different programs and trainings happening in Massachusetts, so much so that I sit in on at least two regular, I should probably sit on 3, but I sit on 2 of the regular forest carbon calls that NGOs and state agencies and everything are having, because we all want to sort of stay up to date on what we're doing. But in general, all of these programs are using the same list of about 10 to 13, depending on whose list you're looking at, forestry practices. And these are things that you guys have been doing for decades. There's only so many ways to increase carbon stocking on the land in a short period of time. And so it's no surprise that these lists are a mix of things that are old and have been done for a long time, and a couple of things that are new based on some of the new carbon modeling and ideas about how to work in adaptation forestry. So one place that you'll find this list, this actually just came out yesterday, and Chris, thank you for including it in the email that went to panelists. It saves everybody from writing this URL down, but I did repeat it at the bottom for those of you who are interested. So this is the Healthy Forests for Our Future guide. It's a management guide to increase carbon storage in Northeast forests. I worked on this along with my colleague, Chris Zimmerman, and it's co-authored by the U.S. Forest Service, Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. Many of you may know Todd Ontel and Maria Genoviak, who are co-authors from the NIACS side. In fact, many of you on this call were part of the stakeholder workshops way back in 2020 when we were starting to put together this list. And we ended with a list of 10 forestry practices that show carbon stock increases on the land within 20 years, which is a really tall order because that's not a lot of time. Certainly not on the forest timescale, but it is on the money and market timescale. And the practices are here on the right. There are a couple things that you will not see on this list, but are elsewhere in the document. Things like planning ahead for disturbance, because we know climate change has increased the frequency and intensity of storms and droughts and other disturbances. Also, thinking about enhanced best management practices that consider those climate change disturbances when thinking about how to protect soil and water. And there's one more practice that isn't on here, which is my colleagues at Mass Audubon and NIAX have been calling it resilience forestry. It's essentially, what do you do when you have a forest that isn't in a good place? It's not going to be eligible for any of the carbon practices or carbon markets because it really is in need of restoration. And probably the best thing to do, even from a carbon perspective, is to reset the clock. That is also a whole other thing of thinking about what forest species and type would you like to move that forest towards? How do you do that? So that is one practice that you will not see in this booklet because it focuses more on resilience. But basically, we've got 10 of the 13 practices here and 2 of them written in the intro and 1 that's missing. If you start to look around, you'll see these things show up again and again. So DCR put out some great booklets, I guess at this point a month or 2 ago. The Caring for Your Woods booklets, really well written. You can see again that U.S. Forest Service NIAX is a co-author. These were also led by Mass Audubon and the Mass Woodlands Institute from Franklin Land Trust, New England Forestry Foundation, and Northern Woodlands. And apparently we all go to Tony D'Amato in Vermont for our pictures, because here are 2 of the exact same pictures used to talk about a very similar thinning practice in the 2 different documents. So one thing that worries me about as Eric said, this is a expanding and quickly moving space. One thing that worries me is the idea that we could sow confusion, which feeds into the narrative of some people that, well, nobody knows what to do, so you better never cut a tree or do anything. I try to push back on that. And I think the idea that all of these programs and efforts are basically using the same list of practices is comforting to me. And then the third thing I wanted to share is carbon offset market funding is somewhat new and it's exciting, but remember that there are other funding sources too. So NRCS has always funded a lot of these carbon and resilience practices. Now there are additional choices. The Family Forest Carbon Program, I'm going to speak about in a minute. After that, you'll hear Kathryn speak about NCX. There is a pilot happening right now only in the Mohawk Woodland Trail Partnership Towns called the Forest Climate Resilience Program. The state EEA runs that one. I'm sure it will expand beyond that pilot area to cover the whole state. Right now, it is focused on municipalities, towns, and cities, and paying them to do some of these practices on their town forest lands. Massachusetts also has a new stream bank reforestation program, which I think is mostly under the radar right now, but there is some money available to reforest areas that are in some ways no regrets. So reforesting a stream bank certainly has carbon benefits, but it has even more immediate erosion and water quality and wildlife connectivity benefits. And so that's a new program just launched this year. And as Eric mentioned, there's emerging programs. So Forest Carbon Works has been doing some inventories in the area. I haven't yet heard of someone successfully going through their whole process. Core Carbon is waiting in the wings as well, and there will be others. So there's a lot out there. I do want to talk a little bit about the Family Forest Carbon Program because it's the one I'm directly involved with. And this program already exists in Pennsylvania and Virginia. It's signed up a couple hundred landowners already, and it is launching in Western and Central Massachusetts, as well as Vermont and Eastern New York early next year, probably February or March. The website will go live. This is the program this is part of the reason that so many of us worked to think through what are the various carbon practices that work in forests that we have here in Western and Central Mass. And when the Family Forest Carbon Program launches, it will pay people to do 3 of the 10 practices that are in that Healthy Forest for Our Future guide. I have 2 other practices here in italics because we know that for land where there are real problems with deer browse or intensive invasive plant infestations, all the assumptions we make about what happens when you open up light or promote regeneration aren't really going to hold. Unfortunately, one of many things the carbon offset markets don't do very well yet is that they don't pay you for things like making sure the deer don't eat all your newly established tree seedlings. And so we know these 2 are important. American Forest Foundation, which is the lead on the Family Forest Carbon Program, is very on board and aware of these 2. But for the time being, we're going to continue to have to find other funding sources like NRCS or state funding to do these as add-on practices. So just real quickly, when the Family Forest Carbon Program launches, it will be open to people who own between 40 and 2,400 acres. They can choose one of 3 practices for which they'll be paid annually for 20 years. The first is being called Grow Older Forests. That's a delay harvest practice for 20 years, after which the landowner is welcome to go and harvest, but they are not able to harvest in a way that completely reverses the carbon stock gains that happened in those previous 20 years. If a landowner is interested in establishing a reserve on part of their land because that's something that's important to them, this also works. After 20 years, the Family Forest Carbon Program itself doesn't have any restrictions on, people can harvest, but if it's something that they're interested in starting, they can on their own start with this and then continue on as a reserve practice. The second option is creating gaps to promote regeneration. This is a practice for landowners who want to create gaps of up to 5 acres, though ideally 1 to 2 acres, on up to 20% of their land with a series of safeguards for biodiversity and other values. And the last one is retaining more carbon in a thinning. This is a thin from below treatment, pretty light-handed, so removing about 25% of the basal area. And this was one that was challenging to make the practice always be carbon positive within 20 years. Again, that's really short. And so as we did carbon modeling and talked with academics and stakeholders and people who'd done this kind of stuff on the ground, there's a little bit of a lack of evidence for this particular practice in the literature. And so to hedge our bets, we actually included large retention zones in these. So areas of the forest that aren't harvested, allowing you to thin in the remaining portions. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a program that's fitting into a highly imperfect market system. So I am not in any way implying that these 3 practices are the best things to do or the only things to do. They're the ones that work in this area to show those true carbon benefits within 20 years, which is what the market is asking of us. A couple things that make the Family Forest Carbon Program different, and again, Eric alluded to a couple of these. So traditional carbon projects pay landowners for carbon sequestered. They have upfront costs. They don't work unless you have thousands of acres. The Family Forest Carbon Program pays landowners to do specific practices. And the analogy that's really been working for me is to think about this like the way NRCS does. So if I own a farm and I have cows and I also have a stream that runs through where the cows are, NRCS will pay me to fence off that stream. The reason they will pay me for the practice of putting up fencing around my stream is that they know that in general, if I keep the cows out of the stream, there will be less sedimentation and erosion. The water quality will be better because it'll have less soil in it and less nutrients in it. Now, what NRCS doesn't do is come out to my farm, put water sensors in the water, measure for a full year to figure out how much sedimentation and nutrients are in there now, then have me put up the fencing, then come out the next year and the year after that and measure to the nth degree how much less nutrient and soil pollution there is in the water. If they did that, it would be a very expensive program and it wouldn't really work very well. And that's what I feel like is happening with these new carbon market programs, is they're recognizing that on a small acreage parcel, you just can't use that original system of the traditional carbon markets. So the way monitoring works in the Family Forest Carbon Program is that the carbon monitoring happens on a landscape level. Basically, the U.S. Forest Service, as we know, every year goes out and does the forest inventory and analysis. And they say, this is what is happening across Western Massachusetts or Central Massachusetts, or whatever geography you want across the whole state, northern hardwood forests. The Family Forest Carbon Program puts plots in forests that are enrolled in the Family Forest Carbon Program and looks at what is happening in terms of carbon there. And that difference, the actual carbon that you can go out and look and feel and touch, that is the amount of carbon that American Forest Foundation can go and sell on the market. So to me, the biggest thing that has happened with this program is that American Forest Foundation has taken on all the risk. They start by paying for the management plan. They let landowners work with their existing forests and harvesters if they want to, though if someone comes into the program who doesn't have a forester, that's fine too. We'll assign them one. And if something goes wrong, if the assumptions that we've made about those practices don't hold and there isn't as much carbon, or there's an insect outbreak or something else happens, the landowner has already gotten paid. It's not their problem. The forester and harvester have done the practice as they were asked to. They have done what they're supposed to do. The risk really lies with American Forest Foundation, which will now have less carbon that it can go and sell on the voluntary market. And that's just a really key difference. You'll see that same thing showing up in NCX and other ways as well, that when the risk and the cost lay with the landowner, that's what made it almost impossible for the small family forest owners that we have in Massachusetts to access these markets. One last thing I want to mention is that right now, only private landowners are eligible for the Family Forest Carbon Program. Nonprofits and municipalities would just need a different set of baseline assumptions. And so they are going to be better off for the time being in Massachusetts working with a program like the Forest Climate Resilience Program, which will pay them for many of the same practices, but doesn't use carbon offsets as its funding. So what to do with all this information? I would encourage you to read the practice guides, sort of look at what DCR or the Healthy Forest Guide that TNC and NIAX have put out. Look at what they're proposing as a list of practices that have carbon and resilience benefits. If these are practices you already do or want to do, it couldn't hurt to write them into management plans. DCR is working on a climate add-on to the forest stewardship plans. A lot of the entry points for many of these programs will be that your management plan says you should do these, you want to do these practices. Watch for trainings and signups for the carbon programs. They're going to come fast and furious as winter and spring hits. And use or promote the program that fits you best and pays you to do what fits your values and plans. Again, as I said at the beginning, I'm not sure it's a great idea to dramatically change what you're going to do because someone offers you money for carbon right now. I think if these practices fit what you want to do, then this is a good funding source for them. But I'm not sure that I would change everything about the type of management I'm going to do to fit a monetary program, just like I wouldn't do that if NRCS started offering a different pool of money or the state did. And definitely do your research about payments and credibility. There's a lot of options out there. I have no desire to compete among the programs. I think each landowner and forester will have to just do their own research and figure out what fits best for them. And I guess my last thing is don't be paralyzed by the fact that there's a flurry of activity here, right? It's a long game. We're talking about forestry. You guys are all in the various ways that you intersect with forests, thinking about forest health and carbon and all those other values in the long term. And you shouldn't stop doing that just because there's some new money available. So I'll stop sharing my screen there because that way I can see the Q&A and answer questions. But note that my email address is up there. You're welcome to reach out to me with any questions. And I also put the Healthy Forest Carbon Management Guide URL up there, and woodscamp.org, which will be the place to sign up for family forest carbon info. So just stop sharing and look at the Q&A. Great. So first question, does this meld with one's current Chapter 61 plans? It should. So the even though the Family Forest Carbon Program is a 20-year, you get paid for 20 years and you sign up for a 20-year contract, it should mesh with your Chapter 61 plan because your plan gets renewed. And in fact, you get paid to renew your plan at year 10 to match a lot of the current use programs. And for some reason, we use 10 years as sort of a planning horizon in many of these programs. That said, we do have some work to do with both use value appraisal in Vermont and Chapter 61 here in Massachusetts, just to make sure that everything's compatible. And there's lots of discussions happening now with DCR and with Vermont and New York state agencies to make sure that we, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. One thing I forgot to mention that's really important that Eric mentioned too. You can't mix and match programs. So if you sign up for NCX and get paid for a year, you can't go and sign up for FFCP in year 2 and get paid for 20 years. And similarly, after your 20 years with the FFCP, based on what I'm going to answer with Mary's question in a minute, you can't sign up in year 21 and do a different carbon registry. The markets don't allow it. So it makes it really important to think about which program you're signing up with and the full length of time that commitment is for. Mary asked a question. Sorry, I'm just reading this, Mary. Yeah, that's a great question. So this is a complex question that Mary is asking. So Mary is asking a lot of questions. So who owns the offset credits? You're operating as your own registry, all these things. So no, this is all third-party verified questions on the VERA, which used to be called VCS, Voluntary Carbon Offset Market. That's really important. Any program that does its own measurements, sells its own credit, I mean, that there's some problems with sort of being, judge, jury, and executioner for your own program. So what happens is that the methodology is publicly available. You can go to the VERA site right now and you can look at the improved forest management methodology, all the assumptions, all the equations, everything is right there for people to look through. What is happening is that so I'm going to talk about Pennsylvania, where this program has been going for a while. American Forest Foundation is signing up and has been signing up landowners in Pennsylvania who agree to do one of the 2 practices that they're offering there. As soon as that happens, the landowner gets reimbursed for their management plan that they wrote these into, and they start getting annual payments. When a couple years have passed, American Forest Foundation goes out and does that verification that I mentioned. Again, all transparent and written up in the Improved Forest Management methodology on the VERA market. Here's US Forest Service FIA data. That's what's happening everywhere. American Forest Foundation goes out and says, this is what's happening on randomized field plots on the forests that are enrolled in our program. This is the difference. And then those are the credits that they own that they can sell. They have been working with various companies to do advanced offtake agreements. They don't want to leave it to chance that there will be a buyer for the credits. They want to know what the price is now, even if they're going to sell them in a couple years. And so that's hopefully that answers the question. And in terms of how does this work for the next 20 years, after the first couple years, you're verifying those new credits every year. So will New Hampshire come online with this program is the next question. Yes, but probably not for a year or 2. The plan is to do Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York this year, and New Hampshire and Maine are part of the next phase of the pilot program. And sorry, I'm reading one more question on here and then I'll go to the chat. in thinning, what total basal area to be trained on site? Oh, I am not a forester, Mary. So Mary has asked a really good question that I don't know the answer to. Mary, that would be a good question for the actual foresters working on these programs. So Richard Campbell at American Forest Foundation, Kevin Yoder at TNC. If you want to email me that question, I can get you an answer, but I don't want to mess it up here because that's more detailed than I have. And then can I combine my Vermont and Massachusetts holdings together? That's an excellent question. It probably depends on what the states think about that. There's no real reason the Family Forest Carbon Program couldn't do that, but there might be reasons, especially if they're enrolled in current use programs, why the states would want them to stay separate. So that's a really great question, Joseph, that you asked. I don't think it would be an obstacle in either case. You might just end up with 2 pieces of land with 2 contracts with the exact same management and exact same practices and payments. I did see that there were a couple in the chat, so I just want to go to those. Okay, great. Looks like, Chris, I'm not missing ones there. And Phil Benjamin looks to be asking a question, but I didn't. Okay. Is there any reason why Eastern Mass isn't included yet? So there are several reasons for that. There is a lot of complexity behind the scenes in terms of figuring out baseline for this program and doing the carbon modeling. And basically, when you get into Eastern Mass, we had more areas that were not of the right forest type. We have different demographics, so the rate of harvest is different. And for the pilot program, this just includes it includes through Worcester County. It's for Western and Central Massachusetts. With all of these programs, they tend to be starting in regions to figure things out and then expanding from there. I think the intent of most of these programs is to cover whole states. They just might be starting in one particular region. So Chris, I think I caught I think I got all the questions that I saw.
I think you did. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And these were great questions, by the way. Thank you guys for asking them.
And yeah, so thanks to Laura. So again, you know, in the email that was sent out in advance of this meeting, like an hour before, you had a link to their website with their climate-friendly forestry plan in there, so you can download that. And we'll put a link to all of these materials again in our the forest update for November, which will go out in a couple of weeks, just so you have those. But thanks so much to Laura for taking the time. She's got to run off, so it's really appreciate you sharing that information. So we have one more presentation on carbon credits, and that's from NCX. You've heard them referenced. Their former name was Sylvia Terra. And with us from NCX is Kathryn Morse, and she's going to share some additional information about the program and how it works. So we're interested to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Alrighty. Here. Okay, can everyone see it all right?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great, awesome. Yeah, again, appreciate the introduction, Chris. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. Again, my name is Kathryn. I'm a landowner success manager at the Natural Capital Exchange, and I'll basically be going through kind of what sets us apart from other voluntary carbon programs on the market currently available, and go through some kind of frequently asked questions that we get, and go through how to actually enroll in the program. So just to start off, so NCX is really built on our base map technology. So we developed this technology with Microsoft a few years ago, and what it really allows us to do is view the size and species of trees on every property in the contiguous US. So this has really allowed us to have the technology to build our platform and be able to, democratize access to carbon programs and grow our program at scale. And, our vision at NCX really is to, build a carbon market that's available for every American landowner. So, some of the barriers to entry to other carbon programs thus far have been, lengthy contract terms, some, 40 to 100 years, large acreage requirements, and high upfront costs to participate, such as, paying for your own measurements. So, we've really worked to develop a program that removes all these barriers and again, democratizes access and allows, all sizes of landowners to participate in a carbon program. So, our mission at NCX is really to, provide, provide basically a way for landowners to get paid for all of the natural capital on their land. And a vast majority of that value isn't, measured or paid for at this moment. So right now we're starting with carbon credits, but we are planning to move into these other ecosystem services. And again, pay landowners for the services that they provide, to the rest of our world. So what makes NCX unique? So as I mentioned before, we've really worked to remove the barriers to entry for carbon programs. So we have 1-year contract terms. There is 0, enrollment fees, and then there's no minimums on acreage. So no acreage requirements to participate. And here's kind of a, slide with a fair amount of information, but it's really important that, I go through kind of the steps for landowners to actually enroll, as well as the dates for this current cycle. There are 4 cycles a year. It's a quarterly, cycle program. And we are currently in the 2022 winter cycle of NCX. So there's 5 steps: enrollment, assessment, fulfillment, deferment, and payment. We're currently in the enrollment period for this current cycle, where landowners, all you do is basically, provide your contact information and just map out your property boundaries in a landowner account. And then you request an assessment from NCX. We do all of this assessment remotely using our base map technology and other data sets to look at standing inventory as well as risk of harvest. So we basically need to prove that there is a risk of harvest in that upcoming year in order to incentivize landowners to not cut down their trees and store more carbon on the landscape. So that's the first step. We just, landowners get an assessment from NCX. And then we start the assessment process. We assess each property again, looking at this harvest risk evaluation, where we then generate an eligibility report of the amount of harvest deferral credits that a landowner can bid in the fulfillment process. So we get the amount of credits, and then in early November, so we're starting to already distribute these eligibility reports next week. And then once landowners receive these eligibility reports and the amount of credits they can participate with, the seller agreements will be available in early November, and the bid submission process will begin, where landowners actually choose the amount of harvest they want to defer and the price at which they want to price these credits at. And then what we do then is we overlay prices that buyers are willing to pay for these credits with what the sellers, what the landowners are willing to receive payment for their credits. And then we come to a market clearing price, and bids at or below that price are then paid that uniform price. So if your bid is accepted, if you're under or at that market clearing price, you then enter into a contract to defer the amount of harvest you said you were going to defer for 1-year contract term. And for this current cycle, it's from January 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. That would be the performance period there. And then a few months, just right at the end of that performance period, we do a second assessment where we verify that these, contract terms were met, that the deferral, commitments were met, and then we will provide payments about 2 to 3 months after that performance period ends. So that would be in January, February of 2023. So that's pretty much, the steps for a landowner, the life cycle for a landowner, as well as the dates for this current cycle. I will be providing, a slide at the end of this, a kind of a chart at the end of this slide that looks at the key dates for more information. So just looking at, some numbers here of, metrics of the last cycle, in this previous cycle, we actually had 5 times the volume from the cycle before. There was over 1.2 million acres that we assessed into this program, and then over 570 landowners participated. And an interesting statistic here is that a quarter of all these landowners were represented by a forester. And we really recommend, if you have a forester, to involve them in the process. And here on the bottom right-hand corner are some of our buyers for the previous cycle. And, these are really large, Fortune 100 and 500 companies that have, these high sustainability targets that they want to reach, net zero commitments, and are purchasing these credits to offset their emissions. So this here is just a testimonial from a landowner, basically going over kind of his decision to participate in the cycle and how he participated in 2 cycles ago, and kind of his decisions in doing so. And Chris, I just want to make sure this video has audio. Sometimes the audio doesn't work.
Well,
Were you able to hear that?
Yep, that works just fine.
Okay, great.
going back to the economic side of it, one of the things that we looked at was the weighing the harvest, what return you would get on the harvest versus leaving this timber standing and generating income from that. And it also allows the decision that we also made is that with the income addition, that it will allow the timber not to be cut, which in turn allows it to grow longer. And each year the timber puts on volume. It does 2 things. It'll absorb more carbon, and it'll also grow in timber value. So it's a win-win, going back to yearly income and more valuable timber in the long run, because we are able to delay the harvest of the timber, therefore keep it growing. And we can benefit from the hunting. We lease it to the hunters. They can enjoy the hunting of the timber also, but that's what was the deciding factor in getting into the carbon program and the in-capture program.
Yeah, so really appreciate, this is Keith McDaniels. He participated again in our second cycle this year, and really appreciate him for providing a testimonial here. And he really goes over, how the program has allowed the, his trees to grow in value year over year, and, getting that yearly income from the program instead of just, no income just from waiting for the trees to grow. So yeah, just some kind of reasonings for joining there. And then, as I mentioned before, the assessment period is currently in process. So the deadline to enroll in this current cycle is December 1st of this year. And just the first process to request an assessment takes around 5 to 10 minutes. So what you would do is visit landowners.ncx.com to create a landowner account. And all you need to do is provide just general contact information and, just map out your property boundaries in our landowner platform. We actually don't need any management plans. We don't need any kind of information about your previous harvesting activity. It's really just those 2 key, information. And then what we do from there is just, again, remotely assess your property and the eligibility of your property. And then we'll provide your eligibility report within about a week turnaround. And here is just kind of a demonstration of how to go about mapping the boundaries. There's no audio on here, but I just like to go through how this, how this system works. So you can actually use this parcel select tool that we, overlays county tax data. What you do is just enter your property, and you enter your kind of city and state, zoom into your property, select the parcels. Once it all looks good, you just click save and continue. And then just read those 2 documents there outlining to the statements. And then you just click request eligibility assessment. So that's pretty much, that second main part of just requesting assessment, just the boundaries. and then just clicking request assessment. And then, again, we'll provide that eligibility report within about a week. So now I'm going to go through just a few frequently asked questions that we get from landowners often. And then, again, I'll open it up to any questions and answers in the chat. So, how much will a landowner get paid per acre? What does this payment look like? So there's many factors that influence, this financial potential, rotation age, species mix, harvesting activity, local timber economics, harvest, mill demand in the area, a bunch of different factors. So our recommendation really is to just, request an assessment. It's completely risk-free, completely free, and then you can receive, the amount of credits that you would be able to participate with. Just for some context here and regarding just average payment, just ballpark what that can look like. The previous market clearing price for the previous cycle was $12 per harvest furrow credit. And then, again, this does vary per cycle because it's based on supply and demand in the marketplace. But we will provide estimated price range guidance for this cycle in November with kind of what that range will look like and more information of how to price your bids. And then, we do require that landowners just map out all of the properties under your ownership, all your land holdings. But you choose how much harvesting you want to defer. You don't have to bid all of the credits that are allocated to you. And here, this kind of second bullet point here, is really helpful for kind of, how to go about thinking of like credits in terms of tonnage. So one harvest furrow credit is about equal to 25 green tons of pine or 19 green tons of mixed hardwoods. So that's usually about 1 truckload. And this is merchantable timber. So, while going through the bidding process, I have an example here that if you were given, 100 harvest furrow credits to participate with, and you're planning on removing the equivalent of about 20 truckloads of merchantable pine off the property, you would only want to bid on 80 credits. So again, that's just an example of, what that kind of looks like. But when you do, choose to participate in the bid submission process, we'll provide a more detailed, explanation of how to price your bids based on estimated stumpage revenue and just more information of what that'll look like in that marketplace. So how should, consulting foresters engage with the program? So most foresters that we work with have been handling NCX similar to how they would handle a timber sale, coming to, an agreement on some revenue sharing agreement. But we also do have an affiliate program available. And if any consulting foresters are here that are interested in getting more information about this, please feel free to email us after this presentation, and I'll give you more information on that. Our email is on the last slide. But some of these benefits of our affiliate program include just additional resources that you can share with your clients, one-on-one webinar opportunities, compensation package, as well as access to our new multi-account dashboard that allows you to view, your landowner, your client properties all in one account versus having separate accounts. So that goes through just a few of those frequently asked questions and, kind of our program in general, what sets us apart. So I hope this was helpful just in, learning more about NCX, and, it's been really exciting to be a part of it and be able to provide a program for all landowners and be able to really, provide an alternate source of revenue for landowners to participate. So again, the website to create an account is landowners.ncx.com. And then if you have any questions, please email us at landowners@ncx.com. And my colleague Lillian and I, we run this email, we'll respond to you as soon as we can with answers to your questions. And then I have the important dates here, just outlined again. So yeah, I'll go through the chat box just to see if there's any questions and answers. Let's see here. Q&A, let's see. Trying to think, let's see. Can I explain the harvest risk evaluation? Yes, so basically, the two key things that we look at in evaluating a property's eligibility is one is standing inventory, so size and species of trees on the property. We need to know how much carbon could be stored on that landscape if it was left alone for a year. And then the other piece is harvest risk. So we look at, mill demand in the area. We look at terrain operability, proximity to mills, few other factors to say, this is the risk that harvesting can happen, that the harvesting will happen on this property in the upcoming year under business as usual circumstances. So those are the two primary factors we look at in the eligibility report. And, this harvest risk is really important because additionality is huge, and we need to make sure that this is additional carbon stored on the landscape and prove that, there's a baseline for that happening. So hope that was a good answer to the question. Let's see here. Can you explain how the, harvest credit is determined? Let's see here. I think I should be able, I think that hopefully the last answer answered that question. And Linda was asking, not being able to mix and match. So you wouldn't be able to do NCX for a year and then family forest carbon. So let's see here. Well, I would reach out to us if, I wouldn't, like, any kind of like double dipping can't happen in terms of, enrolling in 2 carbon programs on the same year. But, kind of, it doesn't matter for us if you're doing something the next year or the year prior, as long as there's no overlap. But that's kind of what we look at, is just that year long term that you're enrolling in. And if there's any other carbon programs, we would, appreciate that you don't enroll in those same acres. But if it's before or after, that's not wouldn't be an issue there. Linda's also asking, how does a conservation easement affect the rate? That's a great question. So it depends what type of easement your property is under. I would reach out to us if you have any questions about that. But our rule of thumb is that if an easement that your property is under restricts harvesting in any capacity, to just leave out those acres that are enrolled. Leave out those acres while you're mapping out your boundaries. But I would definitely reach out to us because there are so many, there's a bunch of different easements, and eligibility, does depend on kind of the terms and conditions of those easements. So how are we measuring forest inventory through NCX? Fletcher is wondering. Great question. So we use our base map technology as well as FIA data to look at the standing inventory on each property. So we're able to do this fully remotely, looking at the size and species of trees on each property. It's pretty crazy, pretty impressive. And we don't need any kind of ground measurement while going through that process. Let's see. Mary's wondering, but can you segregate acres and enroll in 2 programs on separate acres under ownership? Mary, I'm not actually sure on that one. If you can just separate your property and enroll in 2 programs, I would reach out to us, and I'll actually check on that too. But I'm not actually sure if you can enroll half of your property in one or the other. Well, that's a great question. Let's see. So Jake is wondering, how do even-aged forests provide for adequate habitat for wildlife diversity? So I think this was in, response to one of the kind of, look ahead kind of type of credits that we're doing, the biodiversity credits. And we haven't actually mapped out kind of how that's going to look for landowners yet. That's pretty much just kind of on the roadmap of where we're looking at moving forward. The next kind of credits that we're going to be tackling is wildfire mitigation credits. But the biodiversity one, we're definitely looking at as well. Just, it's not something that I have the kind of means to speak about right now. That's a great question though. Linda's wondering, will you share the data about our property after assessment? Let's see, will you share the data about our, well, after the assessment, we will provide you information of your eligibility, like how many acres are eligible and how many credits you can participate. We don't share kind of the size and species on the property usually outright, but just feel free to reach out to us and we can talk about what that looks like. Hope that was helpful. That's all that I see right now in the chat box here.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, and again, this email here, please feel free to reach out to us. That's our primary email for landowners. And again, my colleague and I run that email. So you'll either hear back from Lillian or I on just answers to your questions.
Terrific.
Awesome. Awesome. Here, I'll stop the share here. Okay, great. Well, yeah, thank you again, Chris. Really appreciate the time, and it was great speaking with you all.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And very informative, and certainly people can follow up with you as we move forward here.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds great.
All right, thanks again. All right, up next, as we move forward through the annual meeting, we have another award presentation. This one is the Douglas B. Cook Wood Producer of the Year Award, and it's going to be presented by Jamie Damon, and one of our board members. Jamie?
Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me and see me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the Doug Cook Award was obviously named after Doug Cook. He was a board member from the inception of MFA until his untimely death. Doug was a great supporter of MFA, both financially and with his participation and thoughtfulness as a board member. He was also a very successful producer of forest products. He was very innovative in the way he approached all of his jobs. Our wood producer of the year this year is Chris Perner of Perner Logging and Land Clearing out of Hubbardston, Mass. Chris has been in business for 30 years. He started out as a one-man show with a chainsaw and a cable skidder. And he mechanized many, many years ago. His employees are his son, Jake, Nathan Dennis, Brandon Bunaconti, Stanley Popowski, and Jen Perner, his wife and office manager. Last year, the company produced 21,000 tons of wood chips, 1,500 cords of firewood, both in log length and processed, and about 2 million board feet of saw logs. The company has quite a list of equipment. Now, I won't go through it all, but I'll just give you a feel for it. He has a log truck, a wheel loader, 2 dump trucks, an excavator, 3 tractor trailers, 2 chip trailers, 2 John Deere skidders, 2 log loaders, 1 with a pull-through limber, a track filler buncher, a multitask firewood processor, a banded drum tipper, and a rotochopper horizontal grinder. That's a lot of stuff. I've been on Chris's job many times over the years, and I can say from personal experience that he and his company do excellent work in the woods, taking care to follow all BMPs and minimizing damage to the residual stands. I'm proud to present the Douglas Cook Wood Producer of the Year Award to Chris Perner of Perner Logging and Land Clearing. Chris?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, that's good. My wife turned this on for me because I have not a clue as to what I'm doing. But first of all, I would like to thank the MFA and all those involved for choosing us for this award. We are truly grateful. We realize there are many people in this industry that are as equally deserving, and knowing this makes us appreciate it that much more. I was lucky enough to meet Doug Cook, although at the time I didn't know he was Doug Cook. I met him at an MFA meeting. We just happened to sit next to each other and we were just shooting the breeze. But in talking to him, you know, you could tell that he really cared about this industry and where it was going. And I hope that we can all continue to live up to his high expectations and standards for this industry. With that being said, any business in the forest products industry is only as good as the employees that work there. And we are very fortunate to have the very best. They're a fine group of men who I hope continue to take us down the path of success. We appreciate all the hard work they do for this corporation. And these are very trying times for this industry and in the world. And I hope the next time we meet that it will be in person. On behalf of myself and my wife, Jenny, we sincerely thank you all for this honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Chris. Certainly a well-deserved honor. You know, these awards really designed to be sort of individual awards, but Chris was really adamant that his company be recognized and all his employees, including his care for his employees and his pride in what they do is very evident. So we certainly well-deserved, and we're really glad to be able to recognize you this year. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we're going to have our business meeting. This is going to be very short, very quick, so bear with us here because we got a couple of really important awards to still hand out and some other information. So the first thing that we want to do is approve the minutes from the last annual meeting. So before this annual meeting started, you got an email that had a link to our program book that had the minutes of the last business meeting in there. And so hopefully you had it, they're very simple. So hopefully you had a chance to review those. What I'm going to do to vote to approve these, MFA members should vote on this. I'm going to launch this poll, which is just a vote to approve those minutes as they're outlined in the program book from last year. This will also tell us if we make sure that we have a quorum of members here according to our bylaws to approve these things. So if you can take just a second and click the poll to vote on the approval of the minutes from last year, you can do that. I'll allow, give another 10 or 15 seconds here as people do that. So we have in fact reached a quorum, which is good. And another 5 seconds or so. Okay, I'm gonna end that poll, and that's great. Thank you for doing that. Up next on the agenda is my quick report and really about our finances. You can see those in the program book. And as you can see, we had a difficult year. I mean, lots of folks are having difficult years with the pandemic, and we're among them. So we've seen a decline in our annual fund giving. We really rely on that revenue. We're certainly hopeful that as your business recovers, you'll consider making a donation to the annual fund if you haven't in the past, or it's been a few years since you have. That would certainly be very welcome. But you can see both. We had it's fairly significant for us loss. We have some reserves that we're able to cover that loss, but it's becoming increasingly challenging, and we need to find a way to increase revenue. So we're working on some new programs and things we can do in that regard. We'll hopefully return to in-person events, which will generate some additional revenue. And as I said, we're really hopeful that you'll make a donation to our annual fund, and I'll have a few more. We'll recognize some of our donors in a few minutes. And then there's the approval of our bylaws and the election of new board members, the two remaining things for the board, for the business meeting. Let's just do the bylaws. So with the email that was sent out, there was a link to the proposed amended bylaws. So what are we doing? We're doing a few different things with rewriting our bylaws. The first is we're simplifying our leadership structure. So we have a president-elect, a president, and an immediate past president. We're changing that. We're just going to a simple standard form, which is president and vice president. So that's one change. We're also streamlining and modernizing the bylaws. So we sort of borrowed bylaws from another organization when we were founded. Those were written many, many years ago. And there's things in there that are incorrect. Our fiscal year needed to be updated. There's something in there saying the executive director has to deposit a bond to guarantee their performance that the board pays interest on. Which we're not doing, and really no one's doing that anymore. So we're basically streamlining and modernizing them. So removing things that no longer are happening in nonprofit organizations anymore. And then the final thing that we're doing is expanding the board size. And the reason we're doing that, we're adding 2 additional board slots. We want to get the board felt it was really important to get some new members in, some new blood, and also some younger folks, and so we're going to vote on some of those younger folks in just a minute. So that's sort of a summary of the changes we made to the bylaws, just bringing it into the modern era and simplifying the leadership structure and expanding the board to bring in new folks. So I'm hopeful that you will vote to approve those amended bylaws. And I've just put the poll up on your screen, so please take a second and vote, if you will, to change those bylaws. Again, they were sent to you in that link before the meeting. You can go back and review them if you like, but we don't think there's really anything in here controversial. It's just simple modernization and simplification, and also expanding our board to get some new folks in. So take just another few seconds to vote if you haven't already. And I think that's good. So thank you very much for approving those. And that takes us to our new board members. So our board really wanted new folks in, and they wanted some folks who were younger in age, you know, particularly folks who were kind of mid-career or younger than that. And I think we've accomplished that with our proposed nomination. So we added 2 slots with our amended board laws. We also had 2 board members step down. So that gave us 4 slots for new board members. And so the people that we've proposed that the nominating committee has put forward, again, this is in your program book, are Kyle Anderson from Anderson Timber Harvesting, Evan Delolio from Roberts Renewable Energy and Roberts Brothers Lumber, Kate Marquis from Lilac and Oak Forestry Services, and Jamie Wagner from Wagner Wood. So these are names that may be familiar to you. You know, they're folks that have been around for a while and have been active with MFA in terms of being active members and so forth. So we're really happy to bring those folks on. And then we also have a number of board members who are running for re-election. Some of our more experienced members, Dickon and Charlie, for new terms in their current offices. And then Shane from WD Coles and Bill Hull from Hull Forest Products. So we think the nominating committee did a good job here of adding some new blood, some new folks with different perspectives to our board. And we think this is going to help strengthen the board and make us make things more you know, more appealing to the membership at large and represent a wider range of voices. So if you are able to vote to elect those folks, I've just put the poll on your screen. So please take a moment and place your vote. I'll give you a few more minutes to vote for those board members. And, you know, we're always looking for folks to help in various areas. So if you're interested in serving on an MFA committee, we have some committees in place. We have other committees we're looking to add. We have new programs we're looking to add. So please contact me. Happy to get folks involved if you'd like, and or more involved than you are already. So we're happy to do that. So my contact information will be coming up in a few minutes here. All right, thank you very much for voting. Those board members have been elected. So congratulations to our new members and those who've been reelected. Very happy to have you all on board. Okay, let's see here. We have a John Scanlon. I'm not sure if you're still on or not. John had an issue that he had to perhaps leave. I'm not sure that he is still with us here. Let me just take a look.
I'm here.
Okay. So we're going to reverse the order just because John is under some pressure here. So we're going to actually present the John H. Lambert Award next, if that's okay with everybody. So and the Lambert Award is going to be presented by Dickon Crane, our board president. Dickon, I don't know if hopefully you're available and ready to do that.
Camera is on, and you can hear me?
We can.
Oh, you can. Good. Okay. Well, I'm reading this, but when I think of terms like landscape scale management and diversified succession, I think of John Scanlon because he taught me about these concepts. My father had given 1,100 acres to the Berkshire Natural Resources Council, who in turn sold it to Fish and Wildlife. But he retained the timber rights for 20 years. Over the final years when we harvested, John guided me to accomplish the goals reflected in these terms. I think back on our walks over hundreds of acres and the gems of knowledge he passed on to me, like how you can tell the beech trees with viable burrs because they're the ones with the bear claw marks. And there were a lot of things that John taught me. Under John's leadership, as well as managing DFW's land, he has worked with Mass Wildlife's collaborative grant program with MFA to help land trusts and landowners do habitat management on private land. John Scanlon's 35-year career at DFW and his passionate advocacy for active forest management to increase habitat types that have been declining on both state-owned and private land makes him a worthy recipient for the Lambert Award for Forest Stewardship. We hope you have a long and fruitful retirement, because it is my guess you're going to wonder how you ever had time to work. Thanks, John. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much, Dickon. I very much appreciate the introduction. Very much appreciate, being given this award by MFA. Don't really feel worthy, but because one reason for that is because there are so many people who helped me out during my career. But certainly the Crane family has a long history of conservation work out in the Berkshires. So I'm just really pleased to be associated with them. And we use the timber sale rights on because it works so well with the Crane family's land. We did that on several other parcels as well that may not have come into public ownership if we had not been willing to work with the landowners and extend timber rights for a decade or whatever it was. So it's a good model for a private public partnership. I'll be brief. I'm about to get kicked out of a motel room in Minnesota. So I do want to just relay that I really do feel blessed to have spent my career working with two awesome groups of people, right? The Greater Forestry family and the sportsmen and women of Massachusetts who participate in licensed regulated hunting, fishing, and trapping. There's a lot of overlap between those two groups, and no other folks I'd really rather be associated with. The only thing I really want to say now is that these are really challenging times. The whole forest industry is under pressure from the so-called climate activists who try to convey such a simple message: cutting trees is bad because they store carbon. And I just want to encourage all of us to hang in there together and push back. My view is that by promoting an anti-forestry, anti-cutting agenda, these so-called climate activists run the very real risk of putting more carbon into the atmosphere than would otherwise occur with an active forestry community. Right? I caution these folks who say we shouldn't cut trees in Massachusetts. I caution them by saying, be careful what you ask for, and challenge all of us to push back on them and ask them, what are you replacing the wood with? All right. These folks should be happy because the annual per capita use of roundwood in the United States has decreased substantially over time, from about 160 cubic feet per person in 1900. It's down, hovering around a pretty consistent 60 cubic feet per person today. The climate activists should be happy about that, right? Well, the reality is that as we use less wood, we use a lot more plastic, concrete, steel, all wonderful materials that I use. We all use them, but they have a much higher carbon cost than does wood. All right. So I just want to conclude by saying, wood is wonderful. Push back against the anti-cutting message by saying, think things through. What are you replacing the wood with? So I'm just so happy to be associated with all you folks. Brian Hawthorne, who's up next. Brian, I'm so sorry. I didn't do this intentionally to preempt, but I got the cleaning lady looking in the door now. So I gotta sign off. But thanks so much. There's just no other group of folks I'd rather be associated with. You all take care.
John. So John, has been a voice for forest management in his career, and certainly the IPCC and the scientists you've heard reference to today all show that there's a place for an important place for forestry in the climate change mitigation area, and what we're doing is helping climate change. So if we build more with wood than concrete and steel, if we replace fossil fuels with modern wood heat, those all have a benefit, and as we continue to sequester carbon in our own forests. So really someone who's been a calm and reasoned voice throughout his career for forest management to protect wildlife, which is another critical, important piece. So congratulations to John. Really thank him for his many years of service. We are going to go back now to the Friend of Forestry Award. And this year we're presenting that to Mass Wildlife, and MFA board member Fred Hayes will do the introduction for that award.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, John. Pretty much what you just said is why I believe that Mass Wildlife deserves this award. In these times of public criticism of forestry and climate discussions, Mass Wildlife has held fast in their commitment to management on both public and private lands. Here to accept that award of Friend of Forestry is Brian Hawthorne, who co-authored with John the documents which you all should read about carbon storage on Mass Wildlife land. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Fred. On behalf of Director Mark Tisa and the entire staff at Mass Wildlife, I'm honored to accept the Friend of Forestry Award from the Massachusetts Forest Alliance. And personally, I want to say I'm very pleased to see my mentor, John Scanlon, receiving the Lambert Award. As the new Habitat Program Manager at Mass Wildlife, I want to start by saying that we remain dedicated to using forestry as a tool for active habitat management and restoration to conserve the full diversity of birds, mammals, fish, and other wildlife in Massachusetts, especially those identified as species of greatest conservation need in the Massachusetts State Wildlife Action Plan, while also making our forests more resilient to climate change and continuing to contribute to the Commonwealth's commitment to net zero carbon by 2050. But with more than 75% of all forest land in Massachusetts privately owned, we cannot do it alone. Mass Wildlife relies on the efforts of our partners to provide habitat management and climate resilience on private lands, and the Massachusetts Forest Alliance and its members are some of our most important partners. As a friend of forestry, Mass Wildlife not only supports wildlife-friendly forestry on our wildlife management areas, but also makes funds available for projects on private lands. And since I have the stage, I'm just going to take a minute to mention a few of those opportunities. First off, Mass Wildlife's Habitat Management Grant Program is currently accepting applications through November 22nd for funding for habitat improvement projects which provide climate resilience in ecological communities disproportionately susceptible to climate change. Second, since 2006, our habitat biologist, Marianne Pichet, has provided technical assistance to help private landowners apply for financial assistance for habitat projects from NRCS Farm Bill programs. In recent years, biologist Patrick Conlon has helped landowners apply for financial assistance through an NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program to promote young forests. And third, as Dickon just mentioned, we're now working with the Massachusetts Forest Alliance to help landowners access NRCS financial assistance under a new RCPP project called the Massachusetts Collaborative for Private Forest Land. The collaborative is providing up to $1.5 million in NRCS funding to encourage habitat management on private lands that can help rare or declining species like New England cottontail and American woodcock, and that expand on existing habitat projects on public lands. Information on those funding opportunities is available at our website, mass.gov/masswildlife, or feel free to drop me an email, which is brian.hawthorne@mass.gov, and I can direct you to the right people. So again, thank you to the Massachusetts Forest Alliance and to all of you, not only for this award, but also for all of the work that you do providing responsible silviculture, improving climate resilience, and providing much needed wildlife habitat as part of your forestry plans and actions.
Thank you, Brian. As Brian said, we're proud to work with Mass Wildlife on this new RCPP program. If you're a landowner and you've got a forest, you can talk to your forester and explore ways to get some of that funding either from Mass Wildlife or from NRCS, and it's a really valuable thing. Throughout Massachusetts, Mass Wildlife is working to create early successional forest habitat. Those are species that are particularly in need of that particular habitat. And as Brian mentioned, it's we're looking to extend that to private landowners. There are private landowners in the state who have done some of that work, and it's paid off. Their neighbors are very happy when they hear the whippoorwill return. It's protecting the New England cottontail and all sorts of other species that require that young forest habitat. So we're very, very grateful to work with Mass Wildlife, and we're happy that to be able to honor them today with this award. So thanks very much. Just a couple more things. I mentioned our donors to our annual fund. These are some of our biggest donors. You'll find the full list of people who gave $100 or more in our program book, which you can download from the link sent to you earlier. We really could not survive without our annual fund. So we're really hoping that folks will donate this year to the annual fund. We'll be sending out a mailing to you next month. Look for that in your mailbox, and we hope you'll consider making a donation. And if you've never made a donation before, that'll be very welcome. If you have before, we'd love to have you give again. We've heard a little bit of talk about some of the challenges facing forest management in Massachusetts. I want to just give a sort of brief policy update. So there's a number of things happening. There's legislation out there that would remove wood from renewable heating programs and renewable power generation. We're trying to push back on those. The science is very clear that especially modern wood heating is a significant decarbonizer compared to using fossil fuels. So everyone who switches from oil to modern wood heat is doing their part for climate change mitigation efforts. There's also, of course, bills to regulate or ban cutting, particularly on state lands. There's a bill that would regulate hillside forest management on private lands. We're pushing back on all those bills. So what do we do about this? We have a lobbyist that we hire, which costs some money. We also spend a lot of time. I spend a significant chunk of my time on legislative and regulatory issues. So we're meeting with legislators. We have a presentation. We're making them. It's actually paradoxically a little bit easier now with remote meetings and Zoom than trying to meet in person in a busy legislative office on Beacon Hill. So we're working to educate legislators, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback on our presentation. They say it's very clear, the science is very clearly cited, it's convincing, and we hope that we're opening some eyes on Beacon Hill. We continue to work publicly. We issue press releases, we write op-eds and so forth, and work directly with reporters when we see an article which we feel is not up to factual standards. We'll work to educate those reporters and make them aware that we're available to talk to them and be a resource as they write their stories. So there's a whole series of things we're doing to push back on all those things. There's also regulatory issues we're facing. You may have heard about RPS regulations, which is renewable power. We're working to remedy some of the issues that have occurred there. So it's a huge amount of work, it's a huge amount of effort, and there's really nobody else making these arguments on Beacon Hill on your behalf, and which is why we hope that you will support us going forward to help us continue to be your voice on Beacon Hill and protect your interests as forest landowners, as foresters, as timber harvesters, as forest products companies. very much appreciated if you can find something to find some change to throw away during the annual fund campaign. We'd really appreciate that. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's meeting. Just a reminder about credit certificates. If you indicated on your registration form that you were going to require those certificates, we will take the list of people who actually attended the meeting today from Zoom, and we'll email out those credit certificates next week. So look for those early next week at the latest. We'll get them out as quickly as we can. And again, if you missed the very beginning of the meeting, we weren't sure about Connecticut credits, but we've been told that we qualified for one Connecticut CEU, as well as the other credits that we had available. If you have any, I'm always available if you have questions, concerns, or comments about anything. If you want to get more involved with MFA, if you have issues that you run into on your property and things you want to talk to us about, let us be your advocate. Contact us. There's my email address and my phone number. And again, the meeting was recorded. We'll be posting that on our YouTube channel, and the credit certificates go out next week. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Really appreciate your time on a Saturday morning. Thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in person for the next one of these next year. Thanks, everybody.